If you're not familiar with NAB, that's the National Association of Broadcasters. It's a great conference where 90% of what you see is going to be
things I can't afford. Is VR this next thing that will disappear in the next 2 years?
My friends in VR constantly call cardboard poisoning the well.
You have to go at least for a 4K video frame to have an acceptable quality and something which is comparable to what people are used today.
Full Rec 2020 color, which I'm going to say that like I fully understand what that means.
The acrylic-rectangular approach, although it is quite an easy and often used approach, is not ideal in context of efficiency.
I'm Matt, the organizer of the SF Video Technology Meetup and the Demuxed conference.
And I'm Steve, creator of Video.js, the open source video player.
And I'm Phil, the director of Media Technologies Engineering at Brightcove, previously building BBC iPlayer in London.
And you're listening to Demuxed, a podcast for and by engineers working with video.
Demuxed is brought to you by HeavyBit, a program dedicated to helping startups take their developer products to market. For more information, visit heavybit.com.
We're always looking for topics, so if you have any suggestions or just want to tell us how wrong we are, you can find us on Twitter at Demuxed.
On today's episode, we're coming off of NAB a couple weeks ago, so we're going to talk about all the things that we saw there. We were lucky enough to get Reinhard, who is at a company called Bitmovin, and he was able to do a talk at the last SF Video Tech Meetup about 360 video, and so we're lucky enough to get him to come in for the afternoon and talk to us about their experiences there. Hey everybody, welcome to the first Demuxed podcast. This has probably been a year in the making, or at least since before Demuxed 2015. Anyway, today we've got Reinhard from Bitmovin, and he's going to tell us all about 360 video, etc. But first we wanted to talk a little bit about Demuxed in general. So if you're not familiar with it, last year was the first year of the conference, but we think that at this point it's more than just the conference, but also kind of the global community of video engineers. And we've started planning for Demuxed 2016 at this point. So the conference dates have been announced. We're looking at October 13th, and October 12th is going to be FOMS.
And for those of you who don't know what FOMS is, that's Foundation of Open Media Standards, which is a great group of people.
And software.
And software.
There's a lot of S's in there.
There's a lot of S's. FOMS. Oh, God.
No, but yeah, FOMS is also one of the better video experiences I've ever had. I think that's really what got me interested in standards, because if you just hear it, it's super boring. But that's where, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but I'm pretty sure that's where like MSE and EME kind of got their first kick.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And this was back in probably 2011, 2012 when those conversations were kicked off. But yeah, that's where a lot of those standards get started.
So yeah, we're coming off of NAB. I mean, that's what, 2 weeks ago. So if you're not familiar with NAB, that's the National Association of Broadcasters. It's a great conference where, or I don't know, I guess it's more of a trade show, but 90% of what you see is going to be things for a local broadcaster.
Things I can't afford.
Things you can't afford, lights on top of TV towers, other random satellite equipment.
More drones than you can shake a stick at.
But yes, there are awesome things like drones and cool online streaming video startups, things along those lines. But since we're coming off of it so recently, I figured we'd at least go into what we saw and thought was cool. Did you make it to NAB this year, Reinhard? I know I saw some of the other Bitmovin guys.
Yes, actually that was my first time at NAB. And it was pretty impressive, and also we had very nice conversations there, and I think I also saw a lot of you guys there, especially at the meetup, so it was a very nice show.
Yeah, that's right. You made it to the Demuxed party for a little while.
Yes, actually I did.
Cool. Thinking about NAB every year, it's kind of the largest, coming from like the online video world, kind of what we see the most is what everybody's excited about. And it's always what your customers ask you about, but it's very rarely what your customers actually want. I remember, 3 years ago, it was all about HEVC and everybody wanted, do you support HEVC? Because there's not a single piece of hardware that actually supported it 3 years ago. So like it was useless, but there's always kind of that fad.
And then like 2 years ago it was 3D TVs, and those kind of didn't go anywhere. And so it's hard to know if what you're actually seeing there is the exciting thing will actually carry on into like being a reality.
So I guess those things this year would be what, 8K? We started seeing a lot of 8K stuff this year. So $1 million TV, it was priced per square foot, which was quite terrifying. And I guess we have to ask, is VR this next thing that will disappear in the next 2 years, right?
I mean, it's definitely the thing that, like, we'll get into this more later, but I think it's definitely the thing that people aren't quite ready for in terms of like wide adoption, but it's already kind of there, right? Like I'll give it to Wowza. I think they had the best swag of the year with their free Google Cardboard handout. But, I just don't see a lot of consumers dropping, $800, $900. What is even like the published price of the production Oculus?
Best part of $1,000, right?
Yeah, and I think it's roughly the same for the Vive.
Yeah, Vive's nearly
Vive is even more expensive, right?
Yeah, because you got those dangly controllers you wiggle around, where
Very
two
expensive.
Wiimotes you throw around.
But on the other hand side, you get the Samsung one for free.
With the Vive?
No, if you buy the cell phone, then you get the Gear VR for free.
If you want to plug your phone into the front of your VR headset.
Honestly, I mean, coming from my friends in VR, and you guys might have the same feeling about this at Bitmovin, but my friends that kind of are actually familiar with the VR space constantly call cardboard poisoning the well. That it's like ruining VR experiences and making people hate it. And it totally turned me on to it. I mean, like putting a video in this headset and then all of a sudden experiencing like 360 video was transformative. It was really, really cool. And it finally kind of made me believe in just the general application of 360 video online.
But there is a big difference there between like what 360 video is and what VR video is, right? And that's probably where I'd assume they get caught up, right?
Right.
Which might be worth talking about, honestly. I don't know if we want to get into that now, but...
Well, let's talk a little bit more about what else we saw at NAB in general. So, I mean, like lots of 8K, lots of...
HDR? A lot of HDR. A lot of talk about HDR.
Lots of 360 video in general, lots of HDR. And Phil, you were telling me about consolidation of suppliers and platforms. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, what was interesting is, we saw some kind of new exciting stuff, the 8K, VR, the exciting stuff this year. But I think from perspective of kind of the vendors for the encoding space, we're seeing a huge amount of consolidation right now, right? Like Amazon buying Elemental, you kind of got to ask what that means for the bottom end of encoding, Elastic Transcoder. Like we're seeing this new Telestream Cloud product, right, which is PandaStream rebadged now. You've got Ericsson buying Nvivio, Harmonic buying Thompson. I mean, I think that was the most interesting one for me, walking around the floor and seeing this big space where Thompson were going to be and just a sign that says, go to the Harmonic booth.
That's an expensive sign.
That is a really expensive
That's
sign.
a really expensive 301.
Wow. No, yeah, I think there's a lot going on in kind of everyone kind of getting their platforms to a state, where they're stable and consolidated into one place now. And I think one of the, really interesting ones is Beamer buying Vanguard. I don't really think any of us saw that one coming, right? Like that was a surprise for everyone to get that investment and then go buy Vanguard. It's, certainly a really interesting place right now. And I guess that means, from our perspective, are we going to see a load of interesting innovations from all these companies next year, next A&B, or at IBC even, in Amsterdam in September? So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and on that note, we also talked a little bit about HEVC kind of cooling off a little bit. Do you think that's because it's actually kind of becoming a thing now, and it's less kind of the new hotness and more just a standard is a bit of a stretch, but...
I guess from my perspective, you're right. HEVC was last year was crazy. Everyone was just talking about HEVC.
Everyone had their hardware encoder for HEVC.
Yeah, great. I can't play it anywhere, but I've got a hardware encoder for HEVC. I think in the broadcast space and the OTT space, we're certainly seeing some really big players making bets on HEVC now, which is kind of surprising for me. But I think it's looking really different in the browser and phone space, right? We're looking at Google now delivering VP9 by default on all Chrome, right? So, I mean, that's nearly 40% of traffic for YouTube is VP9 now. Mm-hmm. And I think with the direction we're going with the Alliance for Open Media now, I think what we're going to see in browsers over the next 12 months versus what we're going to kind of see when you actually embed a device in someone's house is going to be very different. So I guess, I mean, I didn't really see much talking about VP9 at NAB. There were a couple of people who had kind of some early kind of hardware accelerated VP9 encoders, but nothing mind-blowing, whereas there were a lot of companies doing stuff for HEVC and accelerated HEVC as well. I guess that's another thing that that is becoming like really popular right now. I mean, Elemental have been doing it for years, right? GPU accelerated encoding, and they've done that in AWS as well. But I think what's interesting is now you've got things like the Intel Media SDK coming out, and like the cost now to entry on an accelerated transcode solution is dropping dramatically. The problem there is, right, there's no cloud solution there yet. So that'll be interesting to watch, I guess, over the next 6 months, year.
When we talk about VP9 now, it feels like it's kind of gone from the Google YouTube pet to actually being a legitimate delivery option for a lot of customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which I wouldn't have said, a year ago, 2 years ago, it was just kind of that other format. Like you had, it was, you deliver MP4, H.264, and, people kind of started talking about VP9 maybe a little bit, but now it's legitimate.
Yeah, certainly
contender.
when it was VP8 and WebM, like it was certainly the kind of like that other bastard child codec that nobody was.
Can you say that?
I think that
No
is
rules.
acceptable.
No rules.
Yeah. But I mean, now with VP9, it's really the only next generation codec that's available in the browser. Like there are no other options. So if you're really hurting for bandwidth savings, like that is the obvious solution, the only solution currently. So it makes a lot of sense.
And hardware. I mean, you talk to the YouTube guys, and they're kind of able to bully might not be the right word there. But they're allowed to throw, like they can throw the Google weight around into, if you want to put this YouTube badge on your TV, then you have to support VP9, and like that's happening.
And I think the important thing there is, when you look at the Alliance for Open Media, you've got not only Google throwing the weight behind it, you've got Netflix, you name it, they're throwing their weight behind this AV1 codec, which that's going to be a big deal, right? I think the interesting thing with VP9 is when you start looking at some of the stuff that's coming out around doing VP9 in an FMP4 container, the spec that Netflix put out recently. From what I understand, that's going into kind of Chrome Canary pretty soon. So, we're kind of going to get to a place where you don't actually even need WebM packaging to deliver VP9. So
that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, Netflix put out a spec. Looks like that's what Netflix are doing on their kind of intermediary storage. So yeah,
I had no idea.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Is that on you guys' radar?
We recently went for HOVC, but I think VP9 definitely makes sense also for web-based streaming, especially if you consider that the majority of your users are using Google Chrome, and then it might be a good trade-off to go for a second encoding and have nevertheless a lot of bandwidth savings with that.
I think something really interesting is that when you look at the sort of timelines that the AOM guys are talking about is so aggressive, right? Like they're talking about a bitstream freeze by the end of the year, and a filters freeze middle of next year, which that's really aggressive. Like I don't think the follow up to HEVC is going to be anywhere near that timeline, which I think is an interesting thing, and I don't know if that pushes MPEG in a particular direction about how they go post HEVC or what that means.
So, was there a Lytro booth? Did I just miss the Lytro booth at NAB?
I hear there was. Did you see it, Phil?
Well, they did a talk, which was really good.
Okay.
I think Zach went to their presentation and got kind of hands-on, had a chat with their guys, and said it's some really cool-looking stuff. And I think that space is really, really interesting right now, actually, the light field optics space, right? I was on an MPEG working group the other week, and they're working, from two perspectives on building, light field storage solutions, because, one of the big problems with this new Lytro camera is, right, it outputs a heck of a lot of data, racks and racks and racks of SSDs to record anything with it. And there's actually a lot of work going on to standardize how we record and compress, light field data. So that's going to be pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Did you guys see anything extra special in the HDR front? I mean, because that's also, like, aside from HEVC, like last year, HDR felt like the non-VR buzzword this year. Mm-hmm. Including, like, what's the people that produce the laser
projector?
The
Christie,
that's
yeah.
Their demo was...
That it was like a hockey field, wasn't it?
No. They had a full-on...
Same booth.
Same booth.
Yeah.
Okay.
They had a full-on movie theater, like a 15-seat movie theater, where they showed off their HDR laser projectors, and it was honestly pretty phenomenal. They would show you this is what black looks like on a normal projector, and it's kind of gray. And like, this is what black looks like in our projector, and it was like just pitch black. Like they had to explain that they hadn't just turned off the projector. It was like,
yeah.
I was impressed.
Why don't you go black?
Full Rec 2020 color, which I'm going to say that like I fully understand what that means.
Oh, yeah. All the 2020s.
My vision's 2020. Is that the same thing?
My other favorite HDR, this was... I would love to be the marketing person that okayed this because I know they're giggling the whole time. But I'm standing there looking at this HDR television on the outside of somebody's booth, and it's glorious, and there's this majestic eagle sitting on a post, and all of a sudden it kind of jumps backwards and like a giant stream of poop flies out the back and another eagle enters the scene. But for a solid, it's in super slow motion. So for a solid like second and a half, there's just this giant white stream coming out of the back of this eagle.
In full 8K.
Full 8K HDR. Yeah,
It was the end of Big Book Bunny all over again.
Except way more majestic and sad at the same time.
I think one of the best HDR demos I saw was actually Elementals. They had a really good side-by-side. I don't know where they got the footage from. It was a fire tosser and fire eater. It was really, really visually impressive. Like the fire really brought it out well. I think last year the best HDR demo I saw was actually, believe it or not, the Lego Movie. It's so colorful and so bright that it looks great in HDR. And I think that was Dolby showing that off in Dolby Vision last year. So
anybody else see anything other than drones, which are always cool?
so many drones.
Some guys that are trying to pitch broadcasters to, would this be interesting to you guys to broadcast drone racing? And so they're pitching first-person video drone racing.
Right, that was a hard sell. Is this cool?
Yeah, is this cool, guys? And people are like,
I think that's cool when it includes 360 cameras on top of them, right? And you can just look around. That's going to be so nauseating. We were like,
no, I refuse. I played that stupid space game with the Oculus DK1, and I was sick for a week and a half.
I did get hands-on with, I was happy because I managed to, I didn't get much time on the floor this year, but I did manage to get hands-on with both the Rift production model and the Vive production model, which was great. Like, I was really happy to actually be able to get hands-on with those because my pockets don't stretch to those as toys, unfortunately.
No. And there's also, what was that 360 camera it was actually pretty impressive. It was kind of a square. You showed it to me. It's about
I totally
$2,000.
showed you too.
The Nokia one?
Say what?
Are you talking about the Nokia, the OSO?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it was
Well,
impressive.
there's that one as well. That's not the one I sent you.
Oh, okay.
The Nokia one's really cool as well. I like that one. I can't remember what it was.
I mean, this segues nicely into just kind of the general buzz about 360, because I do think that was, I mean, we walked by the Wowza booth and we were talking to some of the Wowza guys and they're like, yeah, we're not really doing anything special for 360. We're just delivering video and it just happens to be
Flattened onto a plane.
Yeah.
Yeah, the equirectangular.
Yeah. So they're talking, all we do is just deliver that and then you can play it back however you want. But they were still giving out cardboard headsets and talking about VR like it was like a core competency just because that's what everybody wanted to hear. Like, I don't know, what did you guys see that was innovative on that front rather than just what Wowza's doing was cool. It's just like there was nothing out of their kind of traditional offering. It was just, look, you can use this to deliver a VR video. So, what were you guys seeing on that front?
Okay, so I saw 2 VR demos there, and that actually kind of surprised me that I wasn't able to interact with more. Maybe I wasn't trying hard enough, but there's the one where it was 50 people sitting in different chairs, spinning around in the chairs, and it looked like just,
Oh, the VR cattle grazing.
The cattle grazing,
Yes.
yeah. You got in line, you sat in a chair, and then people just looking off in random directions. It looked really kind of freaky to see.
Honestly, it made me question if VR could ever take off because that's what we look like when we're VR. It's a bunch of idiots with a giant block on their face, spinning around in chairs, staring off into different...
Yeah, but then we happily got in line and tried it out.
Yeah. I couldn't help but think as I was spinning in the chair, looking at the ground in the sky, what I looked like to everybody else that was...
That was actually one of my favorite VR things about NAB was taking videos of people with VR goggles on. I have so many videos of guys just swizzing around going, wow, look at this. Oh, it's over here. No, it's over here.
Do you guys see this? No, literally. You're the only one that can see this. I mean, there's something incredibly disconcerting about standing at a booth, waiting in line to play with some headset, and the guy just turns around and faces you like he's staring at you, but he's actually looking at God knows what on the
Did you guys see the Little Red Riding Hood demo?
No.
I think that was actually the demo from the Nokia camera. They shot like this Little Red Riding Hood sort of sketch where there was a girl in the woods, you know, a little red dress, and you were kind of immersed in the middle of it, and you kind of looked around, and the wolf was there, and it's quite cool. It's certainly visually, it was really well shot, and the resolution was really high. You know, it looked great on the headset, so I was very impressed with it. A couple of guys came past the booth and asked me to have a look at some VR stuff they were working on, and it was really interesting. The concept is, you've often got a huge catalog of content, right? And your content isn't going to be 3D overwhelmingly. Like if you're a traditional broadcast, you probably don't have a lot of, you know, VR content. But what their concept was they would kind of put you in a virtual room to watch 2D content. Mm-hmm. So like you're put into this like virtual theater where there's people like sat next to you and stuff, all to watch this like 2D content on a big screen in a 3D world. It's kind of crazy.
I would totally do that on an airplane, though. But I found out. So, Reinhard, you might be able to tell us a little bit more about this phenomenon in general. But I was asking somebody I know from the Oculus team about that. I was like, all I really want to do is put a headset on an airplane and pretend I'm in a movie theater. You can even have people walking in front of me with popcorn for all I care. But like a big movie theater experience on a plane with a headset on, and I have no idea that there's, you know, a 9-month-old screaming behind me. I'm just in the movie theater, right? Like, that sounds awesome. And he was explaining that apparently when you're flying and the plane turns, you actually end up kind of turning your head slowly until you're kind of looking at the bottom right-hand corner, you know, or whatever direction the plane's turning. So, but you don't even realize you're doing it until all of a sudden you're kind of, you know, facing the opposite direction after 20 minutes of watching this movie.
And staring at your neighbor.
Well, I think that would be fun. I would love to see that.
I want everyone else to wear the 3D headset so I can watch this happening.
But actually, it's a good idea to have those things on a plane.
I guess the question there is, when it comes to like recentering content, and I guess this whole thing segues nicely into what exactly, you know, what kind of you guys see as your special sauce at Bitmovin? Because, you know, from the outsider's perspective, what I know about Bitmovin is you guys have a player, like particularly for segmented streaming, adaptive bitrate streaming, and you guys have an encoded API, once again, focused on kind of adaptive bitrate content and segmented outputs. But I had no idea that you guys were focused so much on VR until actually, so we started talking about the meetup last month. And just for reference, video should be up soon on YouTube in general, but...
Matt's staring at me as he says that, knowing that I've got the only copy of it all.
But Reinhard spoke at I guess that was April SF Video meetup, which if you aren't familiar, sfvideo.org, last Thursday of every month. But yeah, so he talked about 360 video and delivery and playback at the last meetup. And before we started planning this, I had no idea that you guys were kind of focused on that. So like, what made you guys decide to go down that route initially?
Yeah, you're right. We are coming out of encoding and player-like service. But it was one of our last hackathons in 2015 where one of our engineers decided, let's go for a plugin so we can stream 360-degree content with our player. And that's where it all started, and things evolved. And we saw a lot of interest in the industry. Not that people are using it too much into production, but they like to know that you can deliver that, and maybe for a good application in the near future that they are ready. And that's exactly what we are doing now. So we get ready for fancy applications, which are not fully there yet. We briefly spoke about the airplane stuff. Actually, I cannot see people sitting in their living rooms with VR devices on their heads and doing things. But there might be some killer application coming soon.
So really right now what you guys see it as is more of I guess like a conversation starter, right? Like, hey, look at this VR product we have. Also, check out the stuff that you actually would use in production right now.
Yes, so it's really a door opener. I mean, we had some live streams in this context already, which are more or less production. But to be honest, yeah, it's things you want to talk about and people want to hear, and people want to make sure you're ready for it. But it's not so much into production right now.
So what do you see as kind of the blocker? Let's pretend that everybody does have an Oculus or Gear VR and they want to watch 360 content in their living room, like right now. Up to the headset, what would you say is, like, what do you see as kind of the current blocker for that being?
I think that there's simply not too much content available right now. It's hard to record it, and also expensive to do that in a really good quality. And up to now, not too many services are having their majority of content in 360 degrees. So I think we're more or less waiting on the studios to produce something.
I mean, is bandwidth going to be a problem here? Because obviously, like we discussed at the meetup, you've got a very big amount of data coming down, but, you know, the viewport is only a small segment of that generally. And, you know, I guess we had a lengthy conversation about, you know, optimizations you can make about only sending pieces of video, but, you know, then if someone looks left or right quickly, you know, it's difficult to then have to quickly switch out to those and maybe, you know, stream the middle of it at a higher quality and, you know, then kind of radiate out in lower qualities. But, you know, I think realistically, right, we've got to be talking about, you know, 4K video to get a good 3D experience, right? And is that going to be a blocker coming up?
Definitely. So as you mentioned, you have to go at least for a 4K video frame to have an acceptable quality and something which is comparable to what people are used today. And that's hard to deliver, especially if your connection is not good enough. I mean, the first major step was to combine DVR and 360-degree video topic with adaptive streaming, which at least provides you with a smooth video consumption also for low bandwidth channels. But as you mentioned, there are a lot of things which have to be addressed in context of efficiency. We are streaming the entire frame and just making use of a very small viewport, which I would consider as a huge loss of bandwidth. So there are topics coming up in the future we want to address. And I think by mid to late 2016, we will see a lot of going on in context of efficiency in the VR and 360-degree space.
So we touched on light field cameras earlier, and I think we even talked a little bit about it during the question and answer session of the meetup, but especially as somebody that only vaguely even knows what a light field is.
The math is amazing.
How does that play into what we're talking about right now? I mean, is that only for CG generated, like for
Yeah, it might even
CG
be worth
content?
like taking a step back. Like, I know when I first started learning about the side of the space, like the difference between 360 video and VR was not very clear. I don't know. Would you be interested in kind of talking to the differences?
Yeah, sure. There is a difference, but nobody is mentioning that. So they all say VR and everyone is good. But actually, the 360-degree video is something which exists in real life. So that's the difference to VR. VR is a virtual space, which is totally designed by the computer, for instance. And the 360-degree video is an actual recording of the real life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the ways I think about it is with 360 video, it's kind of like a big panorama, like a 360 panorama. And say I'm watching the movie and I look down by bending my neck, right? Say I'm looking at the horizon and I bend my neck down to look down. When I look down, I'm still looking at the horizon, right? Because the entire video is actually moving with me there. Does that sound right? And then with VR, it's actually where if I move my head side to side, up and down, it's as if I'm actually in the space itself, and you can experience that.
Yes, that's right. It's a whole different experience, I would say.
Yeah.
So it feels more like you're really in there.
I guess I'm probably wrong about actually looking down on the 360 video, right? Like
it would still look down.
It would still look down, yeah.
You would see the floor.
Tilted your head to the right, you're still in a fixed point.
Yeah.
So I think that's
your head's kind of fixed and like it wobbles around on its own axis, right?
Right.
But you're not gonna look differently at an object, right? You can't like look behind an object or look to the side of an object, right?
If you throw caution to the wind and sprint ahead,
You'll run into a wall. Yeah.
You only have the viewport of the camera, which was recording the scene, so you can't change your position in the video. You can only move around your head, but the position will stay fixed.
So somebody explained to me just a little bit about how, say you had a recording from say you spent the metric crap ton of money that you would need for 360-degree Litro recording, you get a little bit of perspective shift because of the light. Like, How exactly does that work?
We might have to ask Lytro for that, to be honest.
I really should have invited Lytro along to this thing, right?
I think the camera that they were talking about, NAB, it's like a 1 meter by 1 meter sphere, and it's meant for actual like VR recording. So when we're talking about 360 video, like you were saying, your head is in one place and you can't actually move within the space, right? But their camera like takes in all of the light field information within that like 1 meter by 1 meter space. So you at least have that amount of room that you can move around. I didn't try it out myself, but I gotta imagine that there's a big difference there between 360 video and actually being able to feel like you're really there in the space. I don't know. That'd be really interesting to try out.
Yeah, and I think really what Lytro are more going at right now is allowing decisions later in the production chain, right? Like Lytro's objective now, as far as I'm aware, and as far as what he talked about on NAB, is to make decisions later in the production chain, right? For the editor to say, actually, I didn't really want the camera there. I wanted it, 6 inches to the left or 6 inches to the right, and I would have got a better kind of angle on what I saw. Like, I think they're very much focused in that area right now, rather than, being in a space where you can replicate that in a VR or, 360 headset. I think that's way down the chain, like way down the chain. Like I said, with MPEG and others talking about compression standards for this stuff is going to be a long time before we can realistically see a place where you can stream that information and be able to move your head. So
yeah, I mean, everything I've heard about in terms of bandwidth, like delivery, we're talking like 3 gigs a frame or something crazy like that for some of the Lytro content. Like that's, call me crazy, but I don't know if that's necessarily tenable.
Storage is getting cheaper. That's what we always say, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, about that.
Considering I can't get a Google Hangout to work properly for 30 minutes at a time on like a 100 meg connection, I'm skeptical.
Yeah, it's all that rubbish VP9 encoding.
But I am curious. I mean, this has kind of been a constant thing, and we touched on this really briefly before, but being able to efficiently deliver this stuff, and you talk about wasted viewport, or since you're only using this tiny section of the video that you're actually looking at any given time. You mentioned this at the meetup, kind of your plans, but why don't you talk to us a little bit about wins that you see in terms of efficiency and delivery, and how does kind of the Bitmovin forte of adaptive bitrate and segmented streaming fit into that?
Yeah, one obvious fit is, as you mentioned, the adaptation to the bandwidth in context of different quality layers. So that's what we already do. Another obvious thing is to have a better codec, which we already talked about. So having HIVC or VP9 would help a lot, actually. And then it comes to the point where you want to deliver only what's really used by the viewer. So imagine the entire rectangular video, so the flat video of the entire sphere, and the viewport is only a small fraction out of that. And if we just would deliver this small fraction, it would be a huge of bandwidth savings. But once the user moves left or right, then it would be black, which is not the best experience. So it would also be necessary to deliver parts of the frame on the very next and on the very right to the user, maybe in a lower quality, but if he or she turns, that at least there is a picture, and then adapt to the movement of the user as well.
I guess that starts to come down to how good the player is, right? About how quickly it can adapt and how quickly you can jump up bit rates, right? And that gets interesting. So that has interesting knock-on effects in your encoding, right? Traditionally a rendition switch happens on a GOP interval, right? So, to be able to rendition switch quickly to someone turning their heads actually has knock-on effects right down the encoding chain, right?
Yeah, that's right. So there's definitely the majority of the work has to be done on the player side and will be more complex. Yeah, we are not there yet. I think nobody is, but that's definitely the way to go.
Does 360 video have the same frame rate issue as VR video in the sense that, like, as I've heard it, VR video requires at least 120 frames per second to make sure people aren't getting sick, right? As they turn their heads quickly and the frame needs to catch up, like that's what I've heard is like essentially the minimum to prevent sickness, right? Does that go for 360 video too?
I've already heard that, but actually for 360-degree video, I think if you go for 60 frames per second, it's totally fine. At least I haven't been sick for that reason.
When you're taking the picture, so you said equirectangular?
Yes.
So when you're flattening it like that, do you lose any of the detail around the edges of the plain video?
It's not that you lose information. It's more that there is a redundant information on the top and on the lower part of the frame. So like as a landscape, where you see the north and south pole much bigger as it really is. So you add some kind of information you wouldn't need. So also the equirectangular approach, although it is quite an easy and often used approach, is not ideal in context of efficiency.
So we talked a bit at the meetup about DRM and DRM challenges when it comes to 360 VR content. Can you talk a bit more about that and why that's so much of a challenge right now?
Yeah, sure. So we also talked about internally a demonstration at NAB with DRM protected content for 360-degree video, because it's a logical next step, and studios will want to protect their content once they are in a phase where they can make money out of it. And actually to achieve that with our solution, you would have to break the DRM, because what we do right now and what most of the companies are doing is that we take the information of the decoded frame and render it on top of the actual video player using WebGL. But that requires that you get those decoded information, and DRM is exactly in place to prevent that. So we have to come up with new approaches for that, and also align the industry and talk to browser vendors what we can do and how we can establish a more or less standardized way to stream 360-degree videos and VR content with DRM protection.
I think that sounds like a great topic for FOMs, right?
Actually, yeah, definitely.
That's a great breakout group stock.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we are very happy to collaborate, and of course we cannot do that on our own. And to get some partners aligned, that would be great.
October 12th, put it on your calendar.
Noticed.
And then I think there's a great conference happening afterwards. I don't know what that is.
Yeah. Again, October 13th, Demuxed 2016, hosted by Crunchyroll. So it'll be near the Westfield Mall. I always forget what the name of the mall is, but yeah, Westfield Mall, basically.
In San Francisco.
That's probably an important note to make.
Yeah.
Just go to any Westfield Mall that's near you. Ask for Demuxed. They'll know what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, if you don't go to the right one, we'll actually just give you a 360 headset and you can join from there.
Yeah, you go to elevator 4 3/4, and then
elevator 4 3/4.
It's a Harry Potter joke.
I got it. That's a station. It's a platform.
Yeah. Who has trains anymore anyway?
Whoa. Just because your trains don't work in this country, I don't know.
Okay, well, I think we're coming up on our time here, but just wanted to thank Reinhard for coming out. I mean, how much longer are you in San Francisco for?
Thanks very much for the invitation, and I will leave on Friday actually, so only 2 more days left, and I'm glad it worked out.
Great. I'm so glad we could have you by while you're in town. But thanks again for speaking at the conference again, or at the meetup rather. Who knows about the conference? We'll see.
Don't forget to put your submissions for papers in, guys.
Well, yeah, by the time we publish this, that should be online, right? There you go.
Have you not done that yet?
Yes. If you're interested, we should have the meetup talk from Reinhard at SF Video up on YouTube here within the next, I'm going to say week or so, to put a little fire under Phil's bottom.
It's awkward.
So yeah, keep an eye out, and hope to see everybody at Demuxed 2016. That's all we have for today, but as always, we'd love to hear what you thought, even if you disagree, so please reach out on Twitter at Demuxed.
To learn more about HeavyBit, visit heavybit.com, and while you're there, be sure to check out their library. It's packed with amazing talks on sales, marketing, product, and general management from founders of developer tools companies and other industry leaders.